Hello there, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio. I'm Brian Powers, and I have to start off by telling you more is coming. I have another interview, and I have to give a little bit of an apology here to Carol Goki and our editorial board member, Pat Fahey. I was supposed to release the interview that we did with them about Leonard Peltier and his continued fight to get out of really what is like a ridiculous prison sentence, but in his case just says so much about the use of police force and authority in this country. But I've had upload problems, and for some reason I was able to upload this video before I was able to upload that one, and it's just been kind of technical issues. But I promise you, within hopefully the next 24 hours. I will have another episode of Revolution Radio coming out with Carol Goki, who's been working very hard to free political prisoner in the United States, Leonard Peltier. And so if you get a chance to do a little reading up on the case, I think it always helps me at least knowing a little bit about a subject, but don't overdo it, because Carol will talk about his case and also talk about the attempts to get him out of prison. So we will get to that. But today we are going to discuss with the old Idavox crew. If you go to our website, www.njrevolutionradio.com, you can hear the Idavox report, which features Daryle Lamont Jenkins, founder of One People's Project. And you can see Daryle in a number of films, documentaries, all kinds of stuff. So I encourage you to visit One People's Project and check out his work there. And our little podcast also welcomed myself and Christian Perez in it. So we had a little reunion to discuss what's going on in the Ukraine. And I haven't been too vocal about this because I wanted to educate myself. And I think the most important part, and I think the best line in this whole episode is Christian's when he says it's okay to not have a side here. I have many times on this podcast and off the podcast railed against black and white thinking of seeing good and evil in the world, and trying to have, I think, critical thinking skills. Is in a world where you're almost forced to pick a side is very, very difficult, because I think in the start of a war, and the war, I think the part I didn't talk enough about in this interview is the similarities to the invasion of Iraq perpetrated by George Bush and his regime. These are hard things to talk about, but also still be convincing that you out and out condemn what Vladimir Putin has done by invading the Ukraine and slaughtering wholesale civilian areas. I think anybody in denial about what's going on there needs to look at independent international reports. There is propaganda on both sides, and certainly it's hard to know exactly what the truth is, but there's no debating the wholesale bombing. And that there's massive civilian casualties, a level of aggression which needs to be condemned, and condemned strongly, regardless of the history. Some things are just out and out wrong, and war is just organized murder, in my opinion. And so, the committing of these atrocities are crimes, and they should be treated as such. But we also have to understand how we got here. And the excuses that Vladimir Putin has been using, well, why is he using? Some of those excuses are a little absurd. And I know a lot's been made about the Azov regime and things of that nature, but the overwhelming white supremacist movement in the Ukraine is not something that's a reality, although it does exist. The crimes perpetrated against the Roma people in the Ukraine by Ukrainian supported military factions or gangs or whatever you want to call them does exist. And so, as we look through this muck and mire, if we really want to consider ourselves to be revolutionary, and we really want to consider ourselves in the tradition of socialists, anarchists, communist movements throughout the world, well, I think one of the things that I respected about the Bolshevik Party, and I have their pros and cons there, was their steadfastness to peace and not picking a side during World War One. It was that promise to the peasants, to the soldiers, to the workers, that we will end the wars and we will bring people home and we will give you land. Those were the things that helped install the Bolsheviks into power. And, not all those promises were lived up to, but certainly I would hope that as revolutionaries, those will be our calls, as opposed to either deciding whether we want to send arms into Ukraine or whether we want to lay back and just let Putin take it over. My heart goes out to the people who are suffering the consequences of this war. And, I will remind everybody of the quote from Eugene Debs that, if the poor stopped fighting and forced the bourgeoisie to furnish their own corpses, there would never be a war left on this planet. And, it's a shame to see that we have not progressed past this kind of wholesale slaughter of human beings in order to either make a political point or to give more territory to bourgeoisie billionaires who still, to this day, run our world. That's what we're fighting as revolutionaries, isn't it? Not supposed to be each other. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this interview. It was nice to be back with my comrades. We started off talking about a little bit of music because we always talk about music when we get together. We're all big fans of a lot of different genres, so it's always nice to talk a little bit about the tunes, but we do get into it in short order about what's going on in the Ukraine. So thanks for tuning in. www.njrevolutionradio.com. Support us, join our editorial board. Give us a few dollars, please. We could use some money so I have a better internet connection. It'll help me upload things faster, all right? Anyway, thanks a lot for tuning in, and with no further ado, here is a little panel. Thanks for joining us on Revolution Radio. We are here, and I guess it's important to note the date for this one that we're recording this on. It is March 21st, 2022. There's usually a couple days between these episodes when we record them and when I put them out on a podcast. So things may have changed, especially with the topic we're going to be focusing on tonight, which is the war in Ukraine. It's a bit of a reunion show. We have not gotten together since last December. Myself and my comrades Daryle Lamont Jenkins and Christian Perez. You know all of us from the Yanukovych report, which is still on www.njrevolutionradio.com. The Yanukovych report at www.yanukovych.com is still going strong. And Daryle Lamont Jenkins, the founder of One People's Project, the putter together of the Yanukovych report, and a longtime activist. Thanks for joining me, brother. How you been, man? How's the new year been going so far? We haven't spoken in a little while.
Yes, after our falling out due to irreconcilable differences. No, just kidding. Well, as you can see, I'm in the railroad business, so I like to just have my horn toot whenever a lot of things have been going on. I've been just basically trying to keep my head above water, trying to there's this documentary that's being done about me that's going to premiere on April 30th. There is it was done by some Villanova students, actually, I think. And it's going to be a really interesting thing. It's going to be called We Don't Walk in Fear. My mother was even interviewed for the thing.
Wow.
So it's going to be a real interesting experience, basically dragging my family into everything when I never have before. And I'm still fighting the good fight, so to speak. I'm still trying to hassle Proud Boys, still trying to hassle anybody that tries to fight critical race theory. And try to keep people from ever exploring it, or rather exploring Black history, that kind of thing. And I'm also going to, I went to my first concert for the first time in like 2 years. Went to my first concert in 2 years, and it was it was this band called Arch of Shock, out of LA, Crowbar, Sacred Reich, which blew the doors off the Irving Plaza, and not Biohazard. Good grief, Sepultura.
Sepultura.
It's like Igor and Max isn't in the band anymore.
Yeah.
So it's very, very different. But I mean, it's the same songs. I'm going to try to see Igor and Max. They're playing in Connecticut, I think, in June.
As Cavalera Conspiracy?
Yeah, it probably is. Yeah.
Oh, I would go see that because they're going to do Sepultura songs, so it'll be.
They got to do Sepultura songs. I mean,
yeah.
So thanks a lot, Daryle. I mean, it's been good to catch up. I can't wait to get some shows myself, and we're gonna get into the Ukraine with you tonight. And the reason why I'm glad you're here with us tonight is your understanding of white supremacist movements, Nazi movements, these kind of stuff goes really beyond just this country. And we had interviewed a Romani woman out of Croatia on the IDVOX report, which I'll link and appreciate people checking out. And Christian, you're here tonight as always because you're our political science guy. You're the professor. You know something about everything going on. But I should spend a minute catching up with you too because we've talked a little bit and chatted a little bit, but we haven't been on here together since December. What you been up to for 2020?
Just working. Trying to do a little bit more on social media. Still very frustrating for me. Got a class coming up this Thursday, the next 3 Thursdays on the consequences of conspiracy theories. So, I always got my conspiracy theory stuff going. But I do have to say that this past Friday, I went to go see Glassjaw with Folly and Incendiary. And then last week I saw Killswitch Engage with August Burns Red. And you missed the opener, but it was August Burns Red, Killswitch Engage. Oh, I'm sorry. It was Light the Torch. So Howard came out, sang with Light the Torch. And then he came out and did the finale with Killswitch Engage. So for the first time in like 20 years, I got to see Killswitch with both vocalists, and it was awesome.
Moving on. So let's get started with Ukraine. So I wanted to ask first a little bit about our knowledge of Ukrainian history. I think there's a lot of distortions out there, especially on social media. But I think, it's fair to say that history really matters here. Because as we talk about what's happening, it's always important to understand how we got to where we're at. So, what do you know of Ukrainian history, be it, past, way in the past, turn of the century, or all the way up to modern day history? Because we have had some events like the 2014 annexation of Crimea. What do you know about what's going on in Ukraine over the years?
One of the things that have been coming out is the whole thing about how the Ukraine army is loaded with Nazis and all of this. And I got swept up in that early. I mean, not this year, but, like for a couple of years now, we've been talking about how there seems to be no good guys because there's Nazis in Russia, there's Nazis in Ukraine, and they're basically just fighting each other. That has been the gist of what I've thought I knew, back then. But as this war unfolds, I'm starting to learn a lot more, particularly because I am getting my information not from people coming from the West, but from people there. They're the ones that are writing the stories that you see on IDVOX. They're the source of all the information that we take and post on the website, because I do not feel that we here in the West, with our biases and with our self-centered narrow-mindedness where only we matter, can actually tell the story as effectively. Not as I was about to say, tell the story as effectively as anybody there. I'm saying we can't do it effectively. I think we get too caught up in our own personal dogmas across the political spectrum to be realistic about what's going on out there. So I think if we're going to deal with this issue properly, you're going to have to start listening to folks out there. So.
Yeah. We're going to get into, some of the reporting going on IDVOX, certainly in a few minutes here. Christian, what's your kind of knowledge background?
Yeah. So for me, what I understand about the Ukraine is, and I've been looking into this, I've been trying to put it in context for my students, is really the Russian and Ukrainian people, who we would call the Russian and the Ukrainian people, have their roots hundreds of years ago. There were, as the story goes, there were Vikings from Scandinavia who founded Kiev, and the people that we would know today as Ukrainians or Russians really started at that point. But due to geopolitical conflict, the heart of that empire moved eventually towards Moscow. In the time of the Soviet Union, Ukraine was definitely part of the Soviet Union. It was seen as a part of Mother Russia, of Greater Russia. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, you saw a number of Soviet republics either become independent or become deeper entrenched into the Russian Federation. So with the instance of the Chechens, right? The Chechens declared their independence, and they had a series of 2 wars with the rest of Russia. Whereas the Russian government under Putin leveled the Chechen capital of Grozny and then installed this president. His name is Kadyrov. He's the one that the Ukrainians are calling the orcs. They say to Kadyrov orcs, because they're Muslims. So, I mean, with Putin, I mean, it's bogus, right? I mean, okay, you people they're related, right? They're ethnic cousins. The languages are similar. The histories are very much intertwined. But just because, some Vikings landed somewhere hundreds of years ago doesn't give Moscow the right, in my opinion, to dictate what's going to happen in another country. Vladimir Putin, his big argument is that Ukraine, or they call it the Ukraine, right? That it's actually just a part of Russia. And, they've come under the control of these evil forces, and Russia is going to bring them back into the sphere of influence. So that's where we're at pretty much now. In 2014, you had it was the election of their president, Viktor Yanukovych, who, after years of leaning towards the West as a nation state, Ukraine, Yanukovych becomes president. He decides, we're going to go and face the Russians. And that's what led to the Euromaidan protests, which eventually took him out of power. So ever since 2014, the Russians have had a gripe with the government in Ukraine, and they basically say that any government in Ukraine since 2014 is unconstitutional. So that's part of their reasoning for invading Ukraine. That, and obviously Ukraine has a sizable Russian population, because again, those people are very much related. And in the eastern region, a region called the Donbass, there were 2 states called Donetsk and Luhansk, which have declared independence, and they have primarily Russian populations, Russian majority population. So they have declared allegiance towards Russia, and that's where we're seeing a lot of the fighting today, particularly between the Azov battalion, who I'm sure Daryle can tell us about. But we see a lot of the fighting between nationalists in the Azov battalion, Ukrainian nationalists now, and Russian nationalists, ethnic Russian nationalists in the breakaway republics of Donetsk and Luhansk fighting each other. So as Daryle said before, we're talking about fascists shooting each other. There's a lot of non-fascists involved. There's a lot of innocent people getting chopped up in this. But when it comes down to, who has a lot of power, who has international attention, it's the Russians, obviously. And unfortunately, some of these right-wing militias in Ukraine. It's a sticky situation. It's okay to be confused. It's okay to look at the situation and not really know where to stand. This is not a black and white situation. This is war, and it's terrifying.
Yeah. It's ugly. And to talk about, the history of the Ukraine, and one of the things purported from Russian propaganda, and even, questioned in some American circles and other circles, is the existence of Ukraine itself. And part of the justification that Putin has put forward is that Ukraine has always been a part of Russia, and, as you said, was a part of the USSR. Going back to the revolution, Lenin believed that the Ukrainian population should be part of a greater internationalist project, as the USSR was. However, the Ukrainian people are written about this whole time, recognizing and using the word Ukrainian people. And so the existence of Ukraine really can't be denied. It has its own specific culture. It has its own language, even though part of the population speaks other languages, but part of our population speaks other languages. It doesn't make us any less American, and it wouldn't make anybody less Spanish if they were in Spain and spoke Portuguese. So, to kind of deny the existence of Ukraine as just another part of Russia, I think really is antithetical to history. Because even going back to revolutionary times, the Russian Revolution wasn't just one big happy party where the Bolsheviks overthrew the government. There were like 20 something wars on different fronts. Poland, Romania, Yugoslavia. I mean, all these countries were having wars to establish boundaries. And when you talk about, the Ukraine, they themselves, had internal struggles between the red and black armies. And it kind of seemed like the people just chose the Bolsheviks over the white armies, which were simply reappropriating land for rich people. So I think, we have to understand that Ukraine has always had this kind of tumultuous relationship with either Russia or the USSR, but it's also always had its own identity. And, if you
That's what's
hold
important.
yeah, and if you hold that people with their own identity have a right to self-determination, I mean, you can only see what's happening now as, we'll get into all the moral and ethical and horrible genocidal things that are happening, but politically it's wrong. Politically, it's illiterate to say Ukraine doesn't exist or somehow they don't have their own identity, because they have, and they have for thousands of years,
Yeah, I mean, self-determination is important. I mean, if it all comes down to what those people want, right? In my opinion, if the people of the breakaway republics in the east of Russia, if they want to join Russia, let them. That's something the Ukrainians are going to have to get over. But if the Ukrainian people want their independence from Moscow, then in my opinion, they should be allowed to have it. It's not anyone's place to tell anyone else what they can and can't do. That's how I see it.
I think one thing Vladimir Putin has done is he's made every Ukrainian hate him. And I don't think any of them will ever want to be a part voluntarily of that country. I think if there
Some
was
of them will. Like the ones I think that already are it. The ones that want to already are. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like, he's not winning hearts and minds right now, is at all. Let's talk, but I did want to address, and the reason why I want to address some of these arguments is, unfortunately, I've seen some of this on Facebook. I've seen from people.
You do see it on Facebook. That's where you'll find this stupid. Yeah.
This stuff about this stuff particularly about white nationalism, Nazis, white supremacy groups operating in Ukraine. And my thought has always been, we have those kinds of groups operating right here in the United States of America. I don't want Vladimir Putin to bomb New York City because we have Nazis here in America. But is it more serious than that? Do these groups have serious control? A lot has been made about this Azov battalion. Daryle, what do you know about white supremacy, neo-Nazi movements in the Ukraine?
Like I said, a lot of what I was misled to believe that basically it was Nazis fighting Nazis when it comes to whether you're talking about Crimea or anything like that. And I basically just had no opinion of either, and that was the reason why. But this particular conflict has opened up a few eyes. I mean, that the Azov Battalion was founded in 2014, and they had a little bit of a prominence, but that prominence has been diluted significantly in the parliaments and even in the military. I mean, yes, they are in the military, but they're not the big threat. Like you said, we have Nazis doing that here. We have Nazis in the military here. We have the Boogaloo.
We've got the Republican Party
over there to fight, and then they get sent back going, I didn't know it was going to be that hard.
Oh, I saw that.
That was comical. That was.
Well, I have to piggyback on what you said because I read an article today on how the Ukrainians have been exporting white supremacy. And I love how the nationalists realize that internationalism is actually better. So they've been trying to export white supremacy to Brazil. And there's actually a rising white supremacist movement. And I mean, there's always been white supremacists in Latin America.
Especially in Brazil, though.
Especially in Brazil. You've got Salgado and the Integralist movement. We've talked about them in the past. But the Ukrainians, I know that they were involved with some of the white supremacists in Charlottesville, right? For me, what's frustrating is it's just like Russia is a right-wing country. It's very much fascistic and going down, that route. But like these right-wingers are so delusional that rather than like butting up with the Russians, who could be a big-time donor or supporter, They're butting up with the Ukrainians because, from what I understand, a lot of them actually still think Russia is fascist. I'm sorry, is communist. And this is like the lack of intelligence that we're dealing
Well,
with.
let me jump in on that one right quick. I see Brian getting ready to just go, oh, I got to talk about that. But let me get on this first.
I had a 60-year-old woman today say to me, she didn't realize that Russia wasn't communist anymore. And she's a sweetheart. I love this woman, but
all they hear is Putin being old KGB.
But that's all it is. Yeah. And he wants to rebuild this. Okay, I mean, he came of age in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was big and powerful. So he wants to use it as a model. But he's one of the richest men in the world. Is he going to magically give up his hundreds of billions of dollars? Come on.
No, he's not. And
it's obscene.
And that's the real problem. I mean, we're talking about oligarchies. I mean, we're talking about the threat that, say, Occupy was trying to go to deal with, but nobody called it an oligarchy that they were fighting. But it was. Yeah. But now we're calling it an oligarchy when it comes to Putin. But it gets deeper than that. I remember studying Alexander Dugin. One of the guys that was pretty close to Putin at one time, probably still is. He wants to reconstitute the Soviet Union to be a fascist state. And that's what you hear all the time from the fascists in Russia and from the fascists here. I mean, I remember Greg Gutfeld from Fox News years ago saying that it's funny how the left don't like Russia now that they're doing everything right. You know?
Yeah, I mean, there is no national conversation on Russia. No. It's Americans cannot talk about Russia, and it's painfully obvious every day when you watch the news.
When Candace Owens sat here and said something to the effect of, the Ukraine. I mean, first of all, Ukrainian has only been a country since 1989, which just so happens to be the year she was born.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if they came out yesterday.
I think according to Candace, the world started on the day she was born.
Yeah.
So, reality came into being why does she keep wearing her grandfather's old clothes? Have you noticed this trend with her lately?
I don't notice anything about Candace Owens until she gets retweeted. So I'm not studying
her appearances. She seems to have taken to wearing these like overly sized men's sport coats. Like it's very, I don't know.
She dresses like Murphy Brown in 1997.
Yeah, it's very odd looking, and she's been really defensive and quite funny lately to laugh at when you listen to what she says, because she's so ridiculous, man.
But you think about it though. I mean, it's like if you I remember, I mean, we're sitting there talking about Candace Owens. Really, she's irrelevant. I look more on your white supremacists on that we have been dealing with over the past couple of years, and they're all about Putin. They're all about Russia. Yeah. I mean, we saw that in Nick Fuentes' conference just this past month. And that's who you got to hear if you want to know who the real threats are. Why aren't they defending the Nazis in the Ukraine? Why? Because they're not really all that relevant compared to what Putin has to offer. Yeah. And you take a look at the fact that, I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, I went to CPAC. Matthew Heimbach, a well-known neo-Nazi, one of the organizers of Charlottesville, went there to protest. CPAC. Why? Because they had an anti-Putin workshop going on inside, and he was protesting that. Had a nice little conversation with him about Dugin and other things. You can see the video on the Idavox, on the One People's Project YouTube channel, and it's really. I went back to it a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it was pretty much of an eye opener. It says, "Damn, we're hitting on all those things now." It's comical. It's freaking comical. This is one of the reasons why I say I can't listen to the West when it comes to this conflict that we're dealing with.
Yeah, I mean,
I see the ignorance out there that you brought up, and I think it's really up to people to start to just stop for a minute and think about, like, if you just heard Ukraine existed and you're learning and you're starting to understand things, like, don't have that strong of an opinion yet. Like, don't start, like, watch Fox News 5-minute report and then all of a sudden blow your mind out of your own head because you're overthinking. This takes a little bit of study, and even us here sitting, having done some of that study. Now, I was kind of familiar with this region of the world, in its past for a while. And I think, the comparisons of Vladimir Putin to historical figures, I think some are way out of the realm.
Yeah, they need to stop with the Hitler comparisons.
Yeah, but some, however, I think are real. And one of the things that are real are the comparisons. And I don't use this lightly. People throw this all around. It's Hitler. Hitler wanted to expand his territory through violence and through war and through aggression.
That's everybody,
and we've
though.
not seen that, but we've not seen that on this scale in Europe since Hitler. It's not been happening. I think the comparisons, and when you start looking at what's going on the ground, mean, extraordinary level of violence. I think, the comparison is fair as far as his mindset goes. It's a very, post or pre-World War II, even World War I mindset. I don't like the comparisons. I don't think the comparisons are fair to either Lenin or Stalin or Khrushchev.
No, those are even sloppier, yeah.
Presidents, because they were kind of fighting different wars, and some you could say were just to establish their borders after World War I, and some were wars of aggression like Afghanistan and some others. So, but I still think the comparison is unfair. If you want to look at a Russian figure, it's Tsar Nicholas, who was in all these wars during World War I, had overexpanded his troops, and what happened to Tsar Nicholas was the Bolshevik Party, International Women's Day, and a revolution. And what I could see happening here, if Vladimir Putin can't repair his image, because it's going to start to leak in. This war is going to become unpopular in Russia, just like Iraq was. Everybody's ready to invade Iraq. We were all happy about Iraq. 80% approval ratings a few years down the road, and for about 18 out of its 20-year history, all these wars were extraordinarily unpopular. And I don't think Vladimir Putin can avoid the blowback that's coming from this one with his own people. And so, to compare him to any historical figures, I think those two are somewhat justified because you could make relevant comparisons. But I think some of the relevant comparisons, such as he's, Joe Biden and working with, child molesters and some of the other stuff we've seen, of course, is off the walls,
No, I mean, it's different. I mean, like we see, like, it's different camps, right? Like the Cold War analogy exists because you had the West, quote unquote, which the West is still a construct, and you had the communist states, right? But now you have the West is the neoliberal order. So like all the countries that follow the United States, Western Europe, NATO, the overwhelming majority of Latin America, but those countries that aren't part of the neoliberal order, they get targeted. Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, all those countries are different types of governments, different types of economies, different types of backgrounds. But the one thing they all have in common is they all resist the neoliberal order, right? And this is where it is now. And I think this is where Putin is getting support from some people who consider themselves left-wing, is because they see NATO, they see the United States as this great empire. And yes, Russia is, quote unquote, standing up to the West and standing up to NATO, but they're standing up with baby fascism. It's like, yeah, Joe Biden's a crook. The Clintons are crooks. Obama, I don't like any of them, but the answer is not Donald Trump, right? So we have people that think that just because Russia is resisting the neoliberal order, that they are by definition good. And that's not the case. That's not how I see it, at least. I don't think that you have a right to invade other countries. And Russia, to me, is a proto-fascist state. And I don't see that as an acceptable alternative to neoliberalism, right? I'm a socialist. I'm an anti-capitalist. I don't want more capitalism. I don't want more authoritarianism. I want more democracy. I want democracy in the workplace. It's not Russia.
I do want to draw attention to one of the stories that we have on the website on idavox.com. And it goes back to what we was talking about, the Romani people in Croatia. Jordan Vasic, who we had on the show, she represents an organization out there called Minority Initiative. And we are talking about the refugees in the Ukraine. People are trying to get out of the country, trying to make sure that they can survive and everything. We also had to talk about the fact that there were some African students from Nigeria that were basically being harassed and kept from from leaving the country early on. There is a concern about oppressed people being treated like trash in this conflict. And Jordan Vasic had to make the point, and I'm gonna just read the first paragraph here. And again, you can see this article is it's called "Roma People in Ukraine Should Not Be the Victims of Others' Wars." She says, Minority Initiative, a Roma political autonomous organization, is expressing its concerns regarding the Roma population in Ukraine. Thus, we are asking the UN to provide humanitarian to Roma people in Ukraine, as all states are evacuating their citizens, and Roma people do not have state and do not have necessary resources to undertake evacuation for their people. And it is important to note that while some are able to escape, some are able to flee, others are not. And in many cases, it is kind of by design. Again, this is my Western, this is the Western guy looking at the situation, but it is a concern that even in this conflict, there are some lessers that are being treated like the lessers.
There definitely are, and I think
full of that.
It's not just happening in Ukraine either.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Then
I think
there's
that
that.
one of the most valid points about this is the racism that we've seen in comparison to other refugees. And Poland is like one of the countries that freaked out the most about Syrian refugees coming into Eastern Europe. They elected an extraordinarily right-wing government. They acted extremely xenophobic during that crisis. And then here they are with people from the Ukraine in just about the same exact situation, flooding into their country, and they're welcoming them with open arms and giving them soup at the border and not even checking their papers. I mean, it really is a stark contrast, and it's unfortunate. And we've all heard the stories about, Black people being, intimidated, even assaulted, trying to cross the border, legally, because they're not citizens of Ukraine. They were allowed to get out, but they weren't being treated as such. To me, the solution is not to not allow Ukraine people to escape, but to look at yourselves, when whoever is coming over your border is a refugee. And it can certainly be applied to our border and how we treat refugees from other countries coming into our southern border, and particularly here in the United States, because, I guarantee you that Ukrainian refugees will be welcomed into this country with much more ease than people from, African nations, nations where, quite frankly, you're not white,
Yeah, I mean, we see it at the southern border. A Ukrainian passport, if you're in Mexico with a Ukrainian passport, you can get right into the United States. If you're a Russian, nope. If you're fleeing, violence in El Salvador, nope. Guatemala, nope. It doesn't matter. But if you're a Ukrainian, you can get across the border. It's frustrating because even in a time of war, we see white supremacy rearing its ugly head. And, and a lot of the Black Ukrainians, I didn't know this. I mean, a lot of them are African students, but a lot of them are also in Russia and Ukraine. They're biracial children of interracial marriages from the Soviet Union. There are a lot of Africans who went to go study in the Soviet Union. A lot of men who ended up marrying Slavic women and the other way around, and they stayed and they had families.
Yeah.
And,
some of them really liked it. I saw an interview with a basketball player who was, he's an American guy, but he had gone over there because he got a contract over there and he liked it. He really liked living in the country. And so, who are we to say where somebody should be happy at? And it's really unfortunate to hear those stories coming out of there. We should talk for a little while, I think, about the violence going on there and the level of it, because that's sometimes in dispute. And I think during war, misinformation is always given out by everybody, but there's quite a bit of violence. Daryle, you had an article in iVox, and I'll post a link with this podcast about some anarchists and possibly some leftists organizing as far as military action. Can you talk to me a little bit about that article? How you guys, very brief, it didn't give a lot of details, and I was hoping that you could give us a little bit of that and where that article came from.
Well, the article came from one of the websites out there in the thick of things. It's actually was I think it was written in Ukrainian initially. If you go to Rev Dia, it's actually a statement by Rev Dia, and I found it on. I think it's Enough is Enough. Enough 14. If you look for that, that's a international anti-racist news line that I use, and they basically are making it clear that yeah, we're on the front lines and we are fighting, just like the deal when it comes to Rojava. You see a lot of folks out there, a lot of anarchists out there fighting on behalf of brothers and sisters out there, and this is what you're going to see. I mean, we are going to be there's going to be anti-fascists fighting fascism, and what side are they on? They're on the side of the Ukrainians. They're not on the side of the Russians trying to denazify the country, as they like to say. All right, they're trying to denazify Ukraine by getting the Russians out of there, and I would say that's the you can find that on Vox. Like right now, it's the lead story right now. I haven't gotten a new story up yet, so this has been up since March 13th, and it'll be something that I think everybody can get something out of. Incidentally, something really interesting, and it looks like I got to fix something on that site. I found out that it's ironic because there is a story going out there right now that there was somebody who survived the Holocaust that ended up being killed by Russian bombs.
Yeah, I saw that.
And it's like
Too
it's
many.
a mess, and unfortunately I have 5 minutes to stick around, but it's a mess, and all of this is going to have to be taken into consideration. You can't sleep on anything. I think the best way to just fight, just to deal with the racism that we see, is that we just have to demand that all refugees, everybody trying to escape this conflict, need to be treated equally, and everybody just simply needs to get over themselves. Believe it or not, it is that simple to make that demand. You know.
Yes, it is. I wanted to ask Chris about some of the psychology that goes on in war. It's such an intense thing, and life or death. It's a life or death type situation, and a huge part of what's been going on is propaganda. I mean, and nobody's telling you the truth. You kind of know that, and I think you have to watch, reports out of the Pentagon, reports out of Ukraine, or reports out of the Russian military with somewhat of an eye, like, okay, this is kind of the truthiness that I'm getting out of you. But I think a person that's gonna, have an educated opinion and talk about these subjects, to try to take all that in with that in mind. And one thing I guess I've been disturbed about seeing some things on Facebook from leftists and others who may go even so far as to support Russia, which is crazy to me, but or at least defending or somehow minimizing the impact of what's going on. Is either they're denying it's happening to the point of where it's like, well, these attacks aren't that bad, they're not killing that many people, this is fake news.
Yeah, that's
and which us as Americans who look at our current media and we've talked about how terrible the media is, that's going to play with some people. Yeah. The other thing that I see that's disturbing is some type of justification, going back and saying, well, this government shouldn't have been there in the first place, or these are whatever the reason being, that Russia is somehow justified in taking military action. I think where you have to come to some kind of sense of reality here is the level of violence that's going on. We can point to American CIA operations, Americans using covert operations to overthrow governments, and we know that goes on. It's gone on in the past, and we still use
about it.
It's bullying. It's wrong, but it is not blowing up a country's infrastructure and killing thousands and thousands of people in large swaths of territory. It's another level to go to a full-scale invasion. And
I mean, we did it in Iraq and Afghanistan, but
when I was talking about my comparisons earlier, I didn't bring up Iraq, and I should have, because that's probably the last time that we've seen this kind of operation. But even then, if you remember back, our stated purpose was not to change borders, and it was to just liberate Iraq and give it its democratic society. It was George Bush's vision of spreading freedom, right?
Yeah.
But that's not even Russia's tactic. They've gone a step further, and they're basically saying we're going to take over these borders through force. And I think when some of the misinformation out there, it's not exaggerating that much. And even by Russian state reports, they have leveled 90% of the buildings in Mariupol. How in the fuck do you level 90% of the buildings in a town and not kill tens, if not hundreds of thousands of innocent people?
Well, they are.
It's
They are. They are. I mean, you can't look at somebody who was molded by the KGB, who used the state to crush his enemies, who uses the state to go after trans and gay individuals and activists, right? He's not a hero. Like, Vladimir Putin is not a hero. He's not a good guy. Multiple things can be true at once. Yes, you're not, like, we're bombing Yemen right now, right? We just overthrew the government in Bolivia. What was that, 2 years ago, right? That's bad and it's wrong, but it's also true that what Russia is doing, this invasion of Ukraine, is wrong also, right? It's not one or the other. It's not tit for tat. All of these things can be true at once. And I think people need to understand that. You don't point your guns at other people, right? At the end of the day, that's what it's about.
All right. I want to ask let's ask. There's a lot of key players here. We haven't talked a lot about Joe Biden, though, and we've seen the response, and nobody likes Joe Biden. We don't like Joe Biden. Nobody likes Joe Biden. But the response, let's just put ourselves in Joe Biden's shoes. I mean, honestly, I don't want to sit here and criticize. We're not Fox News here. I'm not going to sit here and call him a communist or say ridiculous things about the man. I think anybody given his position is a very tough spot to be. What do we really want from Joe Biden? Let's accept the fact that there is a president. I know we're communists and anarchists and we don't want to have a president to begin with. I got that. But let's just put all that aside for a minute. What do we really want out of Joe Biden to do as president? And what of those things is he doing? And what of those things is he not doing? Darryl, I mean, I'll start with...
We don't want him to do a damn thing. We don't want anybody in the United States government to do a damn thing. That's nothing. If we are concerned as citizens of the United States, we, are humanitarians in this country, are people who are going to go out there and try to help the Ukrainian people that way, is totally fine. I get that. If you want to go out there and try to fight with the Ukrainian people, and you're not going to, and you have an actual sober outlook on what's going on out there, and you think you're not, stop looking at the fact that you might be getting a degree of glory or some nonsense like that. Yeah, do that too. But bottom line is, I think the last thing that anybody wants, other than maybe the Ukrainian, want to have us basically close the skies to Russia. I can understand their concern. I can understand their desperation. But the fact of the matter is, enough with U.S. imperialism. I mean,
selling them arms. We should be sending them these shipments of weapons and other things to help fight. Because honestly,
I mean, if you want to send weapons, yeah, maybe. But you know,
you don't do that. But if you don't do that, they're gonna be wiped out. They're gonna be wiped off the face of the earth, and Putin will get what he wants, and then start.
But we're not going to send. We can't really send anybody over there. We can't do that.
My question was, do you send him these shipments of arms, though? You say nothing. Nothing to me means I'm out. Good luck, Ukraine. I'll see you when Russia's borders meet mine.
I don't want the government involved in this shit. Period. I mean, yeah. Do you want to assist? If you want to assist as a in the sense of providing the Ukraine with weapons, that's all well and good. I do not want I mean, we do this all the damn time. I don't want us in Syria. I don't want us in Iraq. I don't want us in Afghanistan. I don't want us in Nicaragua. I don't want us in El Salvador. I don't want us in places where we can exploit the land after, which we have done. We are not, and we have been saying this over and over and over again. Enough.
I understand, Chris. What's Joe supposed to be doing right now?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have to echo Darryl. I mean, look, I don't want to see Ukrainians get butchered. So I think it's okay to send them arms, but does Flint, Michigan have clean water yet? You know what I mean? Like, have we fixed the schools in this country? We're not getting another stimulus check. So I understand that these aid shipments are to help the Ukrainians, yes, but also Where's our stimulus checks? Where's our healthcare money?
Yeah.
Where's our, none of that stuff is, all that stuff is off the table. All the stuff that got Joe Biden elected is now magically off the table. He's capitulated to the Republicans. We need to minimize what we do in Ukraine. No fly zones. And it's heartbreaking, right? Like the Ukrainian people are getting bombed. Like, I understand them wanting a no-fly zone. Is it worth nuclear war? I don't think so.
Right.
Do we want to send 19, 20-year-old Americans to go die in Ukraine? Because they will die fighting Russians.
I have, for the first time, I guess, in his presidency, in my weaker moments, felt bad for Joe Biden. I'll be honest with you. I think he made a very difficult call in pulling us out of Afghanistan, took a shit ton of flack for that. But he pulled us out of Afghanistan. He did it. He actually did it.
We're still bombing people there. We're still in Afghanistan. It's not in the way we were yet.
He did withdraw the boots on the ground and somewhat follow through on that. I agree. He's got this over horizon thing, and we're still doing drone strikes, and he's not perfect. But I'll just say that he did reduce our use of force in the region, and he's getting pulled into this very hard. And and I know his attitude, and he seems to be sticking by us. If they come up on Poland, I mean, we wind up in a very hairy situation where he believes we're legally obligated to defend NATO territory. And that does mean World War III. And the question is, so here's the thing, we're inches away from that now. And I guess where I've kind of like put myself in his shoes and tried to come up with a judgment of him. I've tried to be fair. I've tried to kind of pull all my politics of the past away from it because they don't mean nothing. Politics really don't mean a lot when people are getting slaughtered by bombs from the sky. You have to put a stop to that. And, Stalin takes a lot of heat for having capitulated to Hitler and come up with some peace treaties that didn't work out well for them. The Americans took a long time to get involved in World War II. But once we finally did, we were able to assist. We came in at the very end. But if it wasn't for our involvement, we would not have been able to wipe out that movement, that Nazi movement of World War II. At what point, it's not a matter of whether you want to be involved. I've been a peace activist my whole life. I don't want to be involved in a war. And I don't want, as a guy with 5 children about to reach military age, see a war come into bout. But at what point do you have no choice? And we saw that in World War II. It got to the point of where the American president had no choice. The war was coming to them.
Yeah, I don't see Putin.
All right.
I didn't think he was going to invade Ukraine.
All right, let's do goodbyes. Daryle Lamont Jenkins, we're going to say goodbye to you, and then me and Christian are going to close this out.
Good to see you, Daryle.
But thanks.
Take care.
What's got going on? What's coming up? How do people find you? Just remind us one last time before you go.
OnePeoplesProject.com, idavox.com. We actually got our fundraiser going on right now. So if you guys can help us out for our spring fundraiser, please do. Because I need to pay a lot of people.
All right. A lot, Daryle.
All right, take care, y'all.
All right, take. So, Christian, we will wrap it up here in a minute, but I guess I wanted to finish this a little bit with you. In talking about Joe Biden and what Americans can do, and like I said, I'm a peace guy. I've never wanted war. I fought against the Iraq war. I was against it from the very beginning, and I'm against this war from the very beginning as well. But the Ukrainian people didn't choose to be involved in this war at all. They were bombed, and now they're defending their homes.
If anything, I would blame.
It isn't a choice. You're either going to get murdered or you're going to grab a gun and go.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is you have the nationalists in the East that have been shooting at ethnic Russians in Ukraine, like the Azov battalion, right? Like, I want to be clear that there are millions of Ukrainians that had nothing to do with this war, right? But as usual, right-wing nut jobs drag everybody else into their nonsense, right? Like, I don't believe all of Russian propaganda, but am I going to sit here and act like Ukrainian white supremacists weren't shooting at Russians? Come on, they're Nazis. This is what they do.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of nuance here. There's a lot of nuance. It's okay not to take positions. And I think we feel like because we're left wing and just because we're all politically minded people, we feel the need to take stands. And you don't always have to just be in a camp. It's okay to acknowledge that a situation is sticky and complex, and there's a lot to look at.
I think it's okay to say war is wrong. I think it's okay to say, what's going on
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
Ukraine is it's a
Yeah.
organized murder is what it is.
Yeah.
That's
The,
what
the, the Ukrainian person fighting because their house got blown up, that is just war.
Yeah. I mean,
When
what
somebody
else?
blows up your family, like what do you expect them to do? Right?
I think
Yeah.
people, you've talked about this with conspiracy theories, and this is where you come to mind is people are always looking for an explanation to
Always.
explain sometimes and they want to feel like somebody's in control of what's going on, and whether it be blaming Joe Biden or and I think in this case, blaming Vladimir Putin's not that. I mean, that's a pretty good blame right there. But I think when you're looking for people blaming neo-Nazis, blaming America's past foreign policy, blaming this, blaming that, I mean, these are all factors,
Yeah.
but you can't put the blame for what happened on them. But I think it's people searching for explanations to something that's just, I mean, when you see it and you hear the reports, if your heart doesn't break, I don't think you have a soul. Because what's going on over there is just a nightmare. It's a living hell for the people of Ukraine, and it's got to stop. And that's all I keep thinking when I watch is like, when is this going to stop? There's no end in sight right now. And I do hope, but I do hope that people listening to this and peace activists out there know that, spreading more disinformation around or making this about politics or making this about this side or that side, it's not helpful. We have to say that war is wrong and war is always wrong. Yeah. Because if this doesn't stop where it's at now, I have a bad feeling. I have a very, very bad feeling about what the next, 20 years or so could be.
I mean, they're talking about China invading Taiwan. I mean, but like when we talk about the consequences of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, that is directly tied to the Arab Spring. That is directly tied to the Syrian civil war, right? And now the Russians, right? I mean, in all these comparisons to Hitler, we can agree to disagree on that, right? But we don't even have to go that far back, right? Vladimir Putin can say, this is the George W. Bush playbook. I'm going at it alone, right? These people are terrorists. They're blowing up my people, and I have to go there and liberate this area. And if I have to go it alone, I will. I mean, Putin, to me, this is Iraq all over again, right? And then we see people like Condoleezza Rice just completely just speechless that Russia is invading another country. And it's, again, I mean, this is the selective amnesia, the selective outrage that we deal with in this country.
I honestly think some of the lines coming out of Russia right now are to mock us. I think they know people are kind of like rolling their eyes a little bit when they talk about mass destruction. They're mocking us. I hope Americans kind of get that they know that they're invading, just to expand territory. But that's exactly what we did in Iraq, and this is their way of kind of poking their finger.
I mean, I heard reports that we were going after water companies, power companies, pharmaceutical plants. The Russians weren't doing that at first.
It's turned into that though.
It turned into. I mean, but like, look, okay, again, everybody thought the Ukrainians were going to buckle. They didn't. So it's like, now what's your strategy? Because they didn't buckle. So now you're just going to get madder. Now you're just going to get madder, and you're going to strike down more. And that's what it is. That's why, they don't have the manpower. So it means more rockets, right? They're running out of resource. That means they're going to fire more rockets. Where they can't send men, they'll just blow it up. And this is,
it's a disaster. And I thank you for joining me to talk about it today. And we'll talk again soon, man. Before we go, is there anything around the people need to know about?
No, just follow me on social media at Perez Podcast on Twitter, Christian Perez on Facebook. Maybe I'll get back on TikTok. I don't love TikTok, but same thing at Perez Podcast. You can send me an email, perezpodcast@gmail.com. I'm always open to chat. And, that's it. Love Revolution Radio. Please give if you can. And, we'll always, no matter what we're doing, we're always going to tell the truth, and we're always going to bring the truth to you. That's what Revolution's about. Revolution Radio is about. It's about the truth.
Thanks a lot for joining me, Christian Perez, and thanks to all there listening to Revolution Radio. Check us out on the web, www.njrevolutionradio.com. To donate, become a member of our editorial board, join me on podcasts, or, just check us out, man. Check out all the old podcasts.